He was America's go-to morning voice for more than 2 decades, providing news to millions of homes and interviewing celebrities and presidents. At the peak of his career, Matt Lauer appeared unstoppable and amassed an estimated wealth of $100 million. However, everything fell apart in one morning in November 2017. As they informed viewers about inappropriate sexual behavior, his co-hosts had to break their voices to announce his firing live on television. What came next? According to insiders, the once powerful TV host disappeared from public life, lost relationships, and is now a recluse who only wants to speak with like-minded individuals. However, this is what actually transpired behind those cameras that no one anticipated. When Matt Lauer started contributing regularly to the Today Show in 1994, he began his rise to prominence as America's morning television king. Lauer had a natural charisma that made people relate to him every morning, unlike other journalists who slog through news pieces and celebrity interviews. NBC saw his promise by 1997 and gave him a promotion to co-host with Katie Couric. His domination in morning television began with this. Millions of Americans come to rely on Lauer as their go-to source for entertainment, news, and weather updates. His interview list featured everyone from pop stars to presidents, solidifying his image as somebody who could handle any story with poise and skill. As his fame grew, so did the financial rewards. From hundreds of thousands to millions, his pay increased until it was reportedly $25 million a year. As a result, he became one of America's best-paid TV personalities, making more money for presenting a morning program than many CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. Lauer maintained a lavish lifestyle, amassed a collection of Hamptons real estate, and relished the seemingly unassailable job security. However, a darker pattern was beginning to emerge beneath this polished public image. Viewers saw the affable host who made their mornings brighter, while his co-workers saw something very different. Rumors of awkward interactions, offensive remarks, and conduct that went beyond professional bounds started to circulate at work. These topics were limited to private correspondence and hushed discussions in break rooms in the early 2000s and 2010s. No one in the network was ready to take on someone with Lauer's degree of authority and clout. The top artist was bringing in a sizable sum of money for NBC. The Today Show routinely earned hundreds of millions of dollars in advertising income while dominating morning television ratings. Uncomfortable questions are often ignored or downplayed when a personality brings in such large sums of money for a network. Around Lauer, those awkward questions were undoubtedly starting to come up. According to later reports, the network was aware of settlements and complaints years prior to his final dismissal, but they kept him on because they thought he was just too valuable to let go. This circumstance went beyond a single man's professional life. It symbolized a whole media empire based on his character from the morning show. Viewers trusted his message, advertisers appreciated his presence, and NBC stockholders were still happy with the earnings he brought in. However, media empires built on shaky foundations eventually break apart, and Lauer's was on the verge of a dramatic collapse. When it would occur was the question, not if it would. One complaint ultimately broke through all the defense and authority that had encircled him for decades on a chilly November morning in 2017. NBC was blind to the fundamental changes taking place in the entertainment sector. Strong men who believed they were untouchable were finding their protection had vanished as the Me Too movement gained unheard of traction. Even industry insiders who believed they had seen it all were taken aback by Lauer's fall, even as he was set to become the most well-known morning television victim of this cultural shift. For years, the warning signs had been evident. However, at his most public appearances, they were concealed in plain sight. Matt Lauer was an expert at preserving deceptive appearances, as seen by the discrepancy between his public and private lives. In fact, throughout his broadcast appearances, the warning indicators of his bad behavior were evident, but they were written off as embarrassing incidents rather than warning signs. The Anne Hathaway interview from 2012 turned out to be especially instructive. In hindsight, Lauer decided to talk about the paparazzi images that had infringed on her privacy rather than her movie or professional accomplishments. He treated an intrusive invasion of her privacy as entertainment news and centered the conversation around what he called a wardrobe malfunction. In her response, Hathaway showed incredible poise by pointing out that such photos shouldn't be taken by photographers, and that the sexuality of unwilling participants shouldn't be commercialized by society. Although her well-spoken criticism emphasized how improper Lauer's strategy was, the episode also exposed a worrisome aspect of his views on women's privacy and limits. His conduct during his interview with Sandra Bullock was also troubling. Lauer mentioned seeing her nude in a movie on multiple occasions, turning into something akin to locker room commentary what ought to have been a formal promotional interview. Despite her obvious discomfort, he persisted in making jokes about her naked scenes being his screensaver. The ease with which he made such remarks to well-known celebrities raised questions about how he may act toward staff members who were much less able to protest his actions. Several sources claim that as Lauer's prominence increased, his behavior behind the cameras became more problematic. According to reports, there was a culture at the Today Show where making offensive remarks or acting inappropriately was accepted, and anyone who voiced concerns was either shunned or fired. Later, footage of Lauer saying offensive things while he thought the cameras weren't filming came to light. In one case, he liked the view and encouraged a female employee to keep a hunched-over posture. These circumstances were especially concerning because of the power dynamics. His remarks, as the show's star and successful manager, fostered an atmosphere in which staff members felt powerless to protest. Women who worked under Lauer reported feeling uneasy around him but also helpless to change the situation. He was the show's main source of income, delivering millions of dollars to NBC as a celebrity. It felt like career suicide to voice objections about his actions, especially because the network seems more concerned with defending their lucrative star than with resolving issues at work. According to sources, Lauer made remarks about the looks of female colleagues, asked improper questions about their personal lives, and created circumstances that went over professional limits in a number of instances. Resistance was practically impossible due to the disparity in power. It took incredible guts to challenge someone who could potentially end careers with a single phone call. And Curry's story came to represent these processes at work. She ought to have been treated equally as co-host, but instead endured what she later described as months of professional abuse. She tried to direct the female employees' complaints to Human Services when they came to her for assistance with Lauer's behavior. While Lauer's job and $25 million compensation were retained, NBC fired Curry instead of responding to the concerns. All employees received a clear message from the network's response. It was unacceptable to challenge their top talent. Lauer continued to be too significant, too lucrative, and too essential to NBC's success to be held accountable. Without any real accountability, this setting permitted his behavior to worsen. Everyone knew that the network would put its income generator ahead of the well-being of its employees. Lauer allegedly became entitled to a situation where he was exempt from standard working regulations. It becomes dangerously tempting to believe that one is immune from consequences when one receives treatment as irreplaceable and makes $25 million a year. The terrible thing about this issue was how many lives and careers were lost while NBC remained protective. Instead of having to maneuver around someone whose behavior made their professional lives uncomfortable at best and horrific at worst, female employees who should have been in secure and supportive work environments had to do so. But power structures based on victim silencing have their limits, and Lauer's was drawing near. At last, someone was ready to breach the barrier of defense that surrounded him. When one woman made the decision that silence was no longer an option, the collapse started. When NBC executives received a thorough complaint in late 2017, the accusations were too serious and specific to be handled by their prior strategies of media management and quiet settlements. Lauer's career was ruined by an incident that happened during the 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi, Russia. The lawsuit claims that Lauer ran into a female NBC employee at a hotel bar after she had had a lot of alcohol. The proof that ultimately put an end to his decades-long career was what allegedly happened next. The contact swiftly turned out to be non-consensual after Lauer invited her to his hotel room, according to the woman. She said that Lauer participated in sexual activities with her that she had not consented to and had repeatedly refused, even though she was drunk and unable to give her consent. NBC officials were unable to reject or quietly resolve the complaint due to the specific depth of these charges. Other victims had the confidence to speak out about their own experiences when this complaint was made public. A former producer of the Today Show, who was accused of wrongdoing in 2001. Under the guise of talking about work, she said Lauer called her to his office, locked the door, and asked her to unbutton her shirt. She claims that once the encounter turned into non-consensual sexual intercourse, she became so scared that she passed out and needed Lauer's aid to help her. There were significant concerns about what NBC knew and when they knew it when his personal aide reportedly had to take a lady to the doctor after meeting Lauer in his office. However, it appears that the network was not sufficiently alarmed by this incident to look into it or take any action at the time. Other ladies came forward with comparable stories. When she refused to have sex with Lauer, he allegedly exposed himself to her in his office and subsequently subjected her to professional reprisal. An adult toy with a note explaining how he planned to use it with her was described by another as an improper gift. There was no denying the pattern. Several women over a number of years have described consistent behavior in which Lauer used his position of power to put them in situations where they felt pressured to accept his advances and threatened to terminate their careers if they didn't. Suggestions of institutional awareness inside NBC gave these accusations more credence. According to sources, the network used non-disclosure agreements to covertly settle various complaints over a number of years, silencing victims and permitting Lauer to carry on with his actions. If true, this implied that NBC was effectively encouraging predatory behavior while making money off of his ongoing presence. NBC released a statement refuting any covert settlements when investigative journalist Ronan Farrow looked into these allegations, describing the cited transactions as standard exit agreements unconnected to misbehavior complaints. But according to Farrow, who had played a key role in bringing the Harvey Weinstein affair to light, there was proof and paperwork that such settlements existed. Because the Sochi tragedy embodied every bad aspect of the situation, it became especially harmful. At one of the biggest athletic events in the world, NBC's most dependable morning host allegedly preyed on a weaker co-worker while promoting the network. In addition to the human cost, the crisis had disastrous network optics. During this time, Lauer's history of poor on-air behavior also came into focus. During his highly criticized 2006 interview with Britney Spears, he questioned her suitability as a mother, made reference to paparazzi pictures, and basically made her cry live on TV. This interview was later used in documentaries that looked at how the media handled Spears, showing how it exacerbated rather than helped her mental health issues. NBC couldn't have come at a worse cultural moment. The controversy involving Harvey Weinstein had already shown how powerful people in the entertainment sector could suppress victims for decades. As the Me Too movement gained traction, viewers were unwilling to ignore wrongdoing by their favorite celebrities. NBC was in a precarious position. There would be severe public outrage and possible legal repercussions if they continued to defend their best-paid celebrity. They couldn't use their old crisis management techniques because the complaint was too specific, the proof was too strong, and the cultural moment was too sensitive. After years of safeguarding their $25 million investment, the network executives abruptly recognized that keeping Lauer would be significantly more expensive than letting him go. However, they were also aware that firing him would cause a stir on morning TV and prompt grave inquiries about their own involvement in permitting his actions. Nobody could have predicted how swiftly and totally everything would go apart after that initial complaint penetrated their defenses. Matt Lauer's career came to an end on November 29, 2017, and he began a total withdrawal from public life. His co-hosts had to break the devastating news to millions of viewers who had relied on him for decades after NBC executives decided to fire him so quickly that Today Show staff only found out about it hours before it aired. Hoda Kotb and Savannah Guthrie found it difficult to disclose that their colleague had been fired for inappropriate sexual behavior. Viewers who had welcomed Lauer into their homes every morning for more than 2 decades were incredulous, as evidenced by the obvious shock on their faces. It was seen by many as a basic violation of trust. The initial effects were disastrous. Overnight, Lauer went from being one of the most well-known media personalities in America to becoming a total industry outcast. No production firm would collaborate with him, no network would consider hiring him, and no amount of cash or connections could undo the harm to his reputation. The financial impact was significant. His $25 million yearly salary was promptly terminated by NBC. Furthermore, Lauer did not get any further remuneration above what he had previously earned, in contrast to numerous celebrity scandals that involved golden parachutes or covert severance packages. The network made it quite evident that they were completely cut off from their former star. It's possible that the personal expenses outweighed the financial and professional losses. Sources close to Lauer claim that the man who used to attract attention at every industry event and Hampton's social gathering was now totally alone. Almost instantly, the social circle that had previously centered around his famous status dissolved, old acquaintances stopped calling, and invitations stopped coming. According to reports, he had lost a lot of friends, with those who had first kept in touch later stopping their outreach. He became more careful about who he interacted with, according to sources. Instead of confronting reality, he would rather surround himself with people who would confirm his version of events. Geographic retreat was another aspect of the isolation that went beyond social groups. According to reports, Lauer stayed mostly at his Hamptons residence, away from the New York City media landscape where he had previously held a dominant position. The personality that had thrived on regular interaction and public attention turned inward, shunning public appearances and staying completely out of the spotlight. After reportedly having problems for years, his marriage to Annette Roque ended in divorce. According to sources, Roque stayed in the marriage for the benefit of their children and to support Lauer's career even though he was aware of his extramarital romances and inappropriate behavior long before the public controversy surfaced. According to reports, even prior to the accusations being made public, they had effectively been leading separate lives. The extent to which Lauer's actions had affected his family was made clear during the divorce process. Whatever remained of their marriage eventually fell apart when the accusations were made public. The public revelation of her husband's actions was both a validation and a source of more misery for Roque, who had suffered years of humiliation in secret. Lauer's seeming unwillingness to take full responsibility for his behavior was especially indicative of his current state of mind. According to others close to him, he thought the punishment was excessive for the claimed offenses and felt unfairly handled. His meager attempts at recovery failed, in part because of this victimization mindset rather than one of accountability. He published an opinion post in 2019 defending himself against certain accusations in an effort to re-enter the public conversation. It was a spectacular failure. The article seemed tone-deaf and self-serving rather than exhibiting regret or personal development, which confirmed the public's belief that he still did not comprehend the seriousness of his conduct. There was a change in his romantic life when rumors surfaced that he was seeing marketing executive Shamana Boss. Even this new relationship, though, brought to light his ongoing alienation from his former life. Uncomfortable circumstances resulted from the couple's attendance at Hampton's parties, where his ex-wife also attended. That demonstrated how his history still followed him. Although it wasn't disastrous, his financial circumstances did drastically shift. He apparently kept a sizable fortune from his years of high income, but his opulent way of life needed to be adjusted. Although real estate investments offered some financial stability, the days of unrestricted spending and the benefits that came with being a television princess were long gone. The most remarkable aspect about Lauer's life after the incident was how almost entirely he vanished from the public eye. Lauer has been virtually silent in a time when disgraced celebrities frequently try to make a return via podcasts, social media, or other channels. No autobiography, no interviews about redemption, and no slow return to the public eye. This absence implies that he either understands how seriously his reputation has been harmed or that he still has hope that he will one day become well known again. According to either reading, the subject is essentially detached from the truth of his predicament and the irreversible character of his decline. The demise of Matt Lauer went beyond personal wrongdoing to represent structural issues with the way the entertainment industry treats influential people and their victims. His case brought to light the poisonous atmosphere that tolerated inappropriate behavior as long as it did not jeopardize financial results. His dismissal at a time when the Me Too movement was at its height turned his controversy from another celebrity's collapse into evidence that no one was above the law, regardless of their status or financial worth to employers. The way that NBC handled the situation became a model for corporate accountability and crisis management. They sent a message to other networks and employers that the old ways of handling similar situations, quiet settlements and willful ignorance, were no longer effective by firing him right away without trying to reach a compromise or waiting for legal action. The influence went well beyond morning TV. Industry-wide networks started examining workplace regulations, putting in place more robust reporting systems, and closely examining their own well-known figures who might be doing similarly. The culture that has allowed these circumstances to continue for decades was confronted by the entertainment industry as a whole. Lauer's dismissal was a significant turning point for victims of assault and harassment at work. It proved that speaking up might, in fact, have an impact on powerful offenders, something that had seemed unthinkable only a few years before. What many others before her were unable to accomplish was true accountability, which was attained by the woman whose complaint brought him down. But the case also brought to light the institutional shortcomings that had let this kind of behavior to persist for so long. If rumors of earlier settlements and unanswered concerns were true, it would indicate that NBC has long put financial gain ahead of worker safety. Questions concerning what the company knew, when they knew it, and why they hadn't taken action sooner were raised. This resulted in changes to the media landscape itself. The dynamics of morning shows changed as networks were more wary of power disparities and relationships at work. As businesses realized the financial and reputational costs of neglecting these issues, the casual misogyny that had become commonplace in many entertainment workplaces abruptly became intolerable. Lauer's story also acted as a cautionary tale about the perils of basing a brand on a single person. NBC was exposed to this kind of scandal as they had made such a significant investment in his success and reputation. He took a large chunk of their morning to establish credibility with him after he fell.